Catacombs, where Modest Petrovich was able to express himself and to encode himself in such a way that today we are the first ones, after all these 144 years since creation of the pictures, looking into the very depths of his suffering soul. Catacombs. What is this piece? The further we advance into this remarkable epic work, which is like a musical Iliad, I already talked about this, the more it becomes perfectly obvious that what we call pictures have become not just a secondary issue, but moved really far, far away. In front of us, of course, is Mussorgsky's confession, from the beginning to the end. In front of us is Mussorgsky, Modest Petrovich persona, expressed in all the themes that one way or another existed in his heart, his brain, in his body. That is, it's he, himself. As I already said in the beginning of our narrative, pictures appeared only as a catalyst, as a trigger that awakened his desire to declare himself completely. Like Liszt declared himself in Mephisto, Sonata declared his very innermost hidden thoughts, same way Modest Petrovich declared himself even more in this work, where we can hear the reverberation of practically his entire music life. Here come live fragments of his overtures, fragments and methods of Boris Godunov, Kovanch, and his song series, The Nursery, and The Flea, and The Fair of Sorochintsy. In short, he spoke himself out, completely spoke out, via piano. Moreover, spoke out his life philosophy and told us his emotion and his very inmost thoughts. After penetrating deep into the tapestry of this canvas, we can say that we know Modest Petrovich personally, consciously and subconsciously, as a whole persona. It's impossible to know him better than learn this piece, than go through this piece. So, Catacombs are, of course, at the center of the dramatic narrative. What do we see at first glance? The static sounds of various volumes. Звуки разной громкости. As performed by pianists for more than a century now, as they all play. Almost 150 years. But let's try to look deeper into these static sounds. Let's walk away from a picture that doesn't really convey anything, where Gartman portrayed himself in Catacombs and thus provoked Modest Petrovich's thoughts about the other world, world of tones, thought that we might call not of this world, or out of this world. If we look at the text carefully, we will find Modest Petrovich's persona in his music. But not just his persona, that manifests itself in the picture's illustration, which seems, at first sight, that is being symbolized by static stone-like sounds. Let us remember the several sounds which are called catacombs, as reflected in the name for this piece, and the transition to promenade on the minor scale. So, let's have a look how it sounds, what they call catacombs. So, then we have transition to promenade in minor scale, and first sight, this doesn't tell us anything. If we go further, we see a method used by all composers from whom Modest Petrovich learned. Schumann, first of all. There's Sphinx. The idea is the same. Mysterious sounds that are played either in static manner or are meant to tell us that we are supposed to make the Sphinx talk. That means we have to tremolo him to make him talk. There are many traditions where to perform Schumann's Sphinx, where he encoded his name, his surname, and was playing with this idea very often, since he is opus 2 Papillons, where also we have the static fate idea. Some musicians play it in the static manner, but separate chords. The other play tremolo and try somehow make this Sphinx talk to tell them their secret. In short, there is technique, there is declaration, mean a lot of improvisation and reading the Sphinx mysteries. The idea came to Schumann from the composer of the pre-Bach era, who developed it. Bach's fond of encoding his name, as we know, B-A-C-H, fugue. The theme of Bach's surname, it's encoded and developed by Bach himself many times. And then, up until now, even Alfred Schnittke wrote fugatos and fugues on this theme. Dmitri Dmitrievich Shostakovich encoded his surname. In short, every composer has his Sphinx, where his mystery is encoded. And this is our task, to unlock it, the secret what composers locked in the idea of Sphinx. Because it's all very emotional, very philosophical, and identifies with a certain persona. Let's try to decode and make talk Modest Petrovich's Sphinx, which is actually not so hard to do if we envision the Russian character at the time. Or like they put it in nowadays, a psychotype of the genuine, remarkable Russian person. Extremely emotional, with highly sensitive psyche, highly intellectual, and carrying the heavy burden of the Russian way of life. The life of a constant drama, understanding the fate of Russian intelligentsia, Russian intellectuals, Russian individualism. In short, all the complexity of the Russian problems, so-called Russian problems, and in addition, all the underlying personal circumstances. And if, in retrospective, we'll now look at the life and death issues and encoding issues, when we'll see that Modest Petrovich is present not just in Promenade, where he declares himself as just walking and marveling over various circumstances, but he is present in practically every one of his works, except for parody, the caricature cartoon-like, the genre scenes. The rest of the scenes we see Modest Petrovich, but on the much higher sophisticated scale. That makes me saying that we see Modest Petrovich in whole. In all the serious nerve entanglements of this epopee, we see him, not only his secret form, where he doesn't really show himself, but where his face is coming out, as like we were discussing earlier, by cinematographic methods. Imagine these cinematography methods when we see the face of the character, and it becomes transparent, it becomes secondary, and we see episodes of his life, various situations, a montage, where it's clear sometimes, and sometimes not clear, and we see his face shining through his eyes and his soul. That's a beautiful cinematographic tool to understand the retrospective of thoughts and looking back at the life, all the important nerve centers of the human life. The cinematographers know how to do it really well, especially nowadays, with all kind of nuances. And so cinematographic methods was of course created by musicians and composers. Cinematography just borrows it from musical composers, from the music composers. Do you remember what Modest Petrovich associated himself with? With which harmony he described himself? very serious spirit. It is almost pentatonic scale, almost the same which Debussy will operate. With only one small deviation. That is, he visits the Slavic transparency of his soul, which is encoded. This is absolutely remarkable. This is impressionist image of the transparent Slavic key that is bursting out at us from before the Christian era, expressed by means of such a remarkable melody the whole world loves. Like the whole world loves the introduction to Tchaikovsky's first concerto, where Piotr Ilyich tells us about the creation of the world. 7 bangs of the creation of the world. 7 bangs of the beginning of Tchaikovsky's concerto. This is the creation of the world. Piotr Ilyich is creating his world. And with this concerto, with his new world, he comes to the public. And he creates also this space of Russian music. It's the first Russian concerto which never was written before. There are no concerto in Russian history. I'd like to go back what was talking about the previous piece, when the musician comprehends what he's doing. The public, the people, not being professional musicians, even having no understanding, get the importance of the message. Anyway, why do we love? Why does everybody knows the fate from Beethoven Fifths? Because a lot of sense is put in it, in formal sounds. The same exact way, everyone knows and loves introduction to Tchaikovsky's concerto, the first Tchaikovsky concerto, because Piotr Ilyich had put a huge amount of sense and energy and ideas in the whole of his whole life in the creation of the world, in these 4 sounds. The same happened to Modest Petrovich, who thought this consonance, bordering both Asia and Europe, is portraying himself as the pentatonic Asian image. Of course, his blood root, speaking here, his pure Slavic blood, from the wild Slavic tribes, and from the perfect purity. Surely he wasn't thinking of this philosophical massive that we are discussing now, when he associated himself. This harmony simply sounded in his soul. So, here we have Modest Petrovich balanced. But take a note. If we remember Old Castle, we are going to pass now, like in a movie, through the remembrance, as if we have already lived our lives and have come to this moment. Catacombs and the central nervous system. Everything comes together here. We are going to see all of this now. Follow it so you can understand what I'm talking about. So from Catacombs, therefore we're going to look back in retrospective. So here we have Modest Petrovich's spirit. Now, then let's see what we have in the minor key. And the first time with the appearance of this piece in the minor scale. We already traced where it comes from. It comes from Tarantella. But whether willingly or unwillingly, Modest Petrovich, he again expressed himself here, only in the minor key. Look at this, here he comes. Modest Petrovich is here. Modest Petrovich is here. He comes. He lived in this castle. He places himself there. The next dramatic piece is based on a Belarusian folk songs about terrible fate, never-ending miserable existence, and sorrowful life of human. And again, Asian theme is encoded in it. again and again, almost Japanese harmony. It is almost pentatonic. Asian grain and salt that lives in these Slavic tribes. This is where he sees himself from coming from, and his music shows it, how Modest Petrovich sees and hears and feels.
По музыке своей души себя видит и слышит, и ощущает Модест Петрович. В миноре она у нас.
The same harmony, the same man who lives there, the same spirit. It's incredibly interesting and deep. It is so interesting, and it is so deep. Did Modest Petrovich realize it, what he was doing and what he was doing? No, I don't know. But this is of no importance to us. What is important is what comes out of the stroke of genius. For us, in retrospective, from our temporary position, it is interesting to see how and in what way this man expressed himself in eternity. Because a human soul is eternal. And everything he carried through his music, everything he gave us, was reflected later in the works of only two men who would be considered his musical relatives. A very nerve-wracking Shostakovich, because there was a constant confrontation with totalitarian regime, to the point of an almost constant hysterical state of mind. So it is, of course, a very much distorted soul due to grief and unhappiness and difficult life circumstances. And then there's a very ironic view, but with the same Slavic roots, the same blood. And this is Stravinsky, who gave us the same harmonic combinations. That later passed on to Debussy, who created his own cosmos. But look, and the kinship of these souls, how it's all wandering, how all this is going. It's like a multi-headed, multinational soul with the same roots provided. They are pure and beautiful and create one musical cosmos. We, on our small planet, are flying through these harmonies with the help of men from different nations, different cultures, through the creations of their work, different times, seen through the prism of their national and personal fates, allow us to hear and recognize, to see and analyze the whole universe. Okay, let's come back to our catacombs. Let's try to make Modest Petrovich's Sphinx talk. So we saw that he existed in this form. Existed in this form. It encodes itself consciously, unconsciously, which is important to us. So let's remember the beginning. The Travel to Catacombs. It's the same passage, only a slightly distorted one. If here, then here, in Catacombs and further on. This is Modest Petrovich again. It's him. It's him. Only he sees himself in a new condition. That's why it's his ego, which he expressed using the Slavic pentatonic, at first in major, then in minor scale, and then he expressed himself as he is not of this world any longer. That is why we see the sphinx-like, stone-like posture. And then the bass passage. The drop to Tartarai, a drop down into the scorching hot death. absolutely obvious composer's methods. It's perfectly obvious. The way we see and associate his emotional senses with all human history, with all of our impressions and emotions in Christianity and before it. Death is always associated with a drop down to the center of the earth, or into the burning griddle with a gigantic fall, and usually chromatic. We can see it from ancient Egypt or Greek music, through Mozart operas coming to our time. Even if we ascend to heaven, the moment of death, moment of dying is always associated with this fall. Chromatic fall to the Tartary. So, we understand that Modest Petrovich, in the image of Sphinx, interesting. Now let's try to make him talk in order to understand what this thing is made out of. So, Catacombs. Only the speaking kind. He is asking to play the second note very quietly. The first note should be played loudly, and the second is very quietly. And the third one, he wants us warm it up. He puts crescendo. So to say, increase in volume, yes? And increase from one piano, from a very, very quiet sound to a huge falter. That means we are supposed to blow up this note using the tremolo, and to become, yes, co-authors. And not just unseen performance of these standing sphinx who don't speak to us as long as we have not been admitted into their secrecy. So, when we get to the double forte, if we play deliberately, like everyone else play, then we won't be able to carry out what he later intends to do. First of all, we won't be able to blow it up from piano to forte. Secondly, he wants us to hit, to accent every second beat of these loud sphinxes. We won't be able to do this if we play deliberate manner. Therefore, we need to improvise here to tremolo when we'll get the result. Then we're having it. So things began talking to us. And every one of these things we have to play with a different technique in order for them to talk to us openly and sincerely. When we come to this point, the sound needs to flow like a wave. Why? I want you to listen. Remember, I was talking about the gypsy orchestras. Remember, I was talking about the vigil in the Malyarovslav's restaurant, about his alcoholism, about the drinking problem, about his falls, about his hallucination, fainting spells, his hysterical spells, about the Sorokin guitar, and it was St. Petersburg already, the gypsy guitar, and the famous Sorokin player, guitarist, the Russian legend, already played it. It's 100 years old. We heard Sorokin play in the 60s, this guitar. Exactly this very guitar Modest Petrovich could have heard in gypsy choir, gypsy orchestra. Look at the connection between the points in time. So in these things we can hear the sounds of gypsy orchestras. That's why we have to make these things talk in a way of gypsy orchestra sound. The cymbals, balalaikas, guitars. Well, you know it very well how it sounds. And we can imagine the character. What character? We can associate Modest Petrovich only with the characters of Mitya Karamazov or Fedor Protasov from The Living Dead by Tolstoy. These are the beautiful examples of Russian national character, unbelievably emotional.
Прекрасные характеры русские, невероятно эмоциональные, которые у нас ассоциируются.
And are practically asocial.
И они вот все
And they all live in that lethal, suicidal Russian bohème.
русской богемы. Смертельной, смертоносной, самоубийственной.
And so here we see. We see them, Karamazov of Dostoevsky, brother Karamazov's. It's perfectly definite gypsy intonation of a terrible musical drama, which was ringing very deep inside of Modest Petrovich's soul. The music, by the way, was one of the defining themes of the sound in Shostakovich's soul as well. He spoke about it himself. And last, if we're already talking about it, we can see a sobbing Russian man, the likes of Mitya Karamazov, of Fedya Protasov of The Living Dead by Tolstoy, a real Russian character, Dostoevsky and Tolstoy, the real Russian. Here is the last part of Sphinx. Of this Sphinx, we can see the pure hysterics of a man. Hysterics of a Russian man, drowning in the ocean of Russian bohème, and gypsy orchestra, and complete self-destruction and absence of control. We practically see a cinematographic scene. You can see a real scene of explosion and despair of Russian hero. And all this is connected with a literal loss of consciousness, which is practically written out here. Modest Petrovich emerged as his promenade form with the spirit of Gartman. We see Modest Petrovich in his real prominent form, only up in the air. That is, he fell down there into hysterics, fainted, and his soul ascended. It is now above, it is above and below. Stasov, who hardly understood anything in what Mussorgsky composed, told us, based on the scarce words of Mussorgsky, what he envisaged himself here as speaking to the dead, a dead town, Gartman talking him by the hands, and they walked together. It was the skulls in the picture. The skulls were starting to light. But it does not matter in a musical sense. There is totally different things here, and it's deeply personal. Here we see the Modest Petrovich's soul, and it falls from heavenly heights down to the sad decorations of hell. And does it with a great fear, as fear of hell. the trembling spirit, foreseeing the black hole of death. The simple matters paint pictures, which are totally overworldly. Very simple. Just two musical voices, double bass, tremolo, and upper voice. But with such a remarkable palette, there is no need to be loquacious. That is exactly the same in literature, in the poetry, as in the music, which is the sister of all these arts. And brevity and laconism because all-inclusive and complete when the feelings are deep. When feelings really run deep. We see enlightenments. Why did I say it was the central nervous system of all? Simply because here we can see the true collapse of a man, the explosion of despair, practically described by a fall, hysterics, loss of consciousness, and flight into the other spheres, in other worlds. It's a typical psychedelic music, a psychedelic state of mind. Surely it is the center of drama, an epic drama as that. Therefore, Homer comes to mind, and the passions of ancient Egypt, Greeks and Egypt, Homer, and Saul passing through Haron. Here Modest Petrovich opened up his soul to us, shared his state of mind, and described it. So the real Russian hero that we knew from books, like I said before, Dostoevsky, Karamazov, Fyodor Protasov of Tolstoy, this amazing character created by our genius authors. And how his soul is expressed in musical form. Here, he is a real Russian hero with his confession. And this is a completely unique experience that we will always live through with him and with Russian people, Russian consciousness, Russian soul, Russian spirit. This is a monument to the Russian soul, to that kind of Russian people who are no longer here and will never, ever be here, which makes this work, and especially the central nervous system of this work, Catacombs, the later the ascending, traveling to another world, meeting with the spirit of a dead friend, the fear, all this makes it such a tremendous, theatrical, cinematographical, audiovisual experience, there is a real psychedelic experience which no other art and no other work can communicate. For this, we'll be always grateful to Modest Petrovich for immortalizing that which has now forever disappeared from this planet. Thank you.